Hey y'all. I'm just gonna be drinking tea today. It's gonna be mostly silent. I just want to drink some tea. I will be taking notes, so silent isn't the right word. I'm gonna be talking about the tea, but it's gonna be about the tea mostly, and I'm gonna have long pauses and such. That's all there is to it. Got something called a Shui Jin Gui. Shui Jin Gui. It's a rock oolong. I'm taking notes with GPT, so expect to hear GPT. I'm about to drink a tea, and I want you to take notes for me.
Sure, I'd be happy to help with that. Let's get started. How would you like to begin?
I'm drinking 6 grams of a Shui Jin Gui rock oolong.
Great choice. How does the tea look and smell before you brew it?
Smells really nice. It's like a grainy, kind of like a Nutri-Grain almost, like a fig fruitiness to it.
Sounds lovely. How's the colour of the dry leaves?
Colors, it's really dark. So strip oolong, really dark, kind of a reddish tint to it. Dark leaves. It's got quite a fruity scent. Smelling it with it being warm. Fruity, kind of a cherry almost, and very sweet feeling in the tongue, on the nose, on the palate, all around from the smell.
That sounds delightful. It's amazing how the scent can already hint at the flavours. What are you noticing as you take your first sip?
I just did a quick rinse, and it smells really nice. It's medicinal, licorice, cherry, mineral.
Those are some complex notes. How's the body and mouth feel of the tea?
Well, not quite there yet. The look of it is it's very orange. I guess I have to mention my materials. I usually use glass while I'm on stream so I can show it, but I'm not using glass today. I'm using silver, so it won't be possible to show very well, I don't think. I've got a Gaiwan 100 milliliters, a, a silver pitcher, which is 150, and a silver cup, just a small cup.
Using silver is a unique experience, especially with rock oolongs like Shui Jin Gui. The warmth and conductivity of silver can enhance the tea's flavors. How does the first sip taste?
Very nice. There's a lot of the charcoal roast. This is charcoal roasted tea. You can feel it, taste it immediately. It's,
Charcoal roast often brings out a deep, rich flavor. Are you noticing any specific flavors or sensations?
well, it's just spreading very quickly and feels nice.
That's a great sign. It sounds like the tea is opening up nicely. Are you picking up any sweetness or minerality in the aftertaste?
I'm getting a lot of fudge in the front.
That's interesting. It sounds like a nice, complex flavor profile. Are you enjoying the overall balance of the tea?
There's also a creaminess to it, so it's almost like ice cream. I'm also in there. I'm getting a lot of feeling on the tongue, just activity, kind of pinching and moving and releasing.
It sounds like the Shui Jin Gui is really dynamic. The creamy, ice cream like texture combined with those active sensations must be quite an experience. Are you noticing any lingering aftertastes or changes in flavor as you sip?
There is an aftertaste, very sweet and almost like hard candy.
That sounds wonderful. The sweet, candy like aftertaste must be a nice finish. Are you noticing any other flavors developing as the tea cools or with each infusion?
So right when the tea is a little cooled down, but as it sits on the tongue, like right as it's in the mouth, um, it's very smooth to swallow. It's really round to the touch, and it has this flavor it's reminding me of an ice cream shop, and I really like coffee ice cream, so that's kind of the feeling of it or the taste of it. It's like I'm getting a sense of coffee ice cream.
That's fascinating. It's amazing how the tea can evoke such specific and comforting memories. The smooth, round texture must be a delight. Are you planning to do multiple infusions to explore how the flavors evolve?
Yeah, I'm going to use you to take all these notes, and I'm going to go for multiple infusions. And let me just fill in some other details here. I'm getting this from Wii Origin, and it is the Shui Jin Gui. It was harvested in 2013, so that's 12 years ago, and it was charcoal roasted a couple of times. I'm not sure how many times throughout the 12 years, but a few times. And it was over time stored just in airtight, dry area. And I recently had this tea, as in yesterday. I had this tea yesterday, and it's just in a paper bag at the moment. So that's fill you in there.
Thanks for the details. It's good to know the background and storage conditions. Multiple infusions should reveal more complexity. How are you finding the second infusion compared to the first?
Not quite there yet. Still in the first infusion. As I drink it, and if I agitate it, it tastes really very nice and powerful. A couple other things. Water I'm drinking is glacial water from empirical water. Temperature, I'm just going 99 degrees. I had 6 grams of tea, and it's an electric kettle. Do you know how to brew Shui Jin Gui that's aged? Is there like any special technique?
You're already doing great. Aged Shui Jin Gui can benefit from slightly longer steeping times to bring out deeper flavors. Using water around 99 degrees is perfect. Adjusting steep times slightly longer with each infusion can help highlight different notes. Does that sound like something you'd like to try?
Yeah, when you say longer, can you be more specific about how many seconds a long steep would be?
Sure. For the first infusion, you might steep for about 20 to 30 seconds. For each subsequent infusion, you can add 5 to 10 seconds. So for the second infusion, maybe try around 30 to 40 seconds and gradually increase the time as you go. Does that help?
Yeah, that's perfect. I'll try a 30-second infusion. Now, I actually only did I did what was a normally would be considered a rinse. I did a flash steep for the first steep. So the next steep will be a 30-second steep.
That sounds like a good plan. The first steep being a quick rinse helps to awaken the leaves. A 30-second steep for the next infusion should bring out more depth. Let me know how it goes.
Time is 6:48 a.m. It is quite cold today outside. It is warm where I am now inside. 64 degrees inside. I think it's like 30 outside. There's a winter storm coming through Georgia today and for the rest of this week. I don't know what the humidity level is, but it's not very humid, and I'm by myself, no guests today.
It's great that you're taking this quiet time to enjoy your tea. The cooler weather outside and the warmth inside can really enhance the experience. How is the 30-second infusion tasting?
I'm still appreciating the aftertaste of the first infusion, and it's quite, there's like a very strong sweetness. Again, it just seems like a rock candy sweetness, but it's very isolated, localized. It's very localized. It's like very single particular places where I can taste this rock candy like taste, and it's it's similar to itchiness. I'm not sure how to describe this. It's similar to itchiness. It's not itchy at all. It's very pleasant. It doesn't have whatever. There's something about itchiness that's a little bit more hazy and spreading, but this is like very localized, very particular. But there's something similar to it with itchiness.
It sounds like the tea is giving you a complex and intriguing experience. That localized, pleasant sensation might be the tea's unique way of engaging your palate. It's great that you're noticing such detailed nuances. Are you ready to try the next infusion and see how it compares?
Time is 6:50, going for the second or the 30-second steep.
Great! Enjoy the second infusion. Let me know how it tastes and if you notice any new flavors or changes in the mouthfeel.
Just pour the 30-second steep. Very nice pour, good shape, very nice flow. There was seemed to be a lot of bubbles as I was pouring, but they quickly dissipated. They seemed really thick and robust, but then they disappeared immediately.
It sounds like you're having a great pour and a rich infusion. The bubbles can indicate a good amount of dissolved gases or even some natural oils in the tea. How's the aroma and initial taste of this infusion?
It's very nice. Slightly more intense, though not much more intense, but slightly more intense. Feels good in the mouth. It's got more of that charcoal or, roasted flavor. I don't know if it's necessarily charcoal tasting, but a roasted flavor. Very nice and more of that sharp rock candy that's like some type of cherry type flavor.
It sounds like this infusion is bringing out even more of those rich roasted notes and that distinct sweetness. It's great that you're picking up on those complex layers. How does the aftertaste compare to the first infusion?
The aftertaste has the sweetness, more of it, and it's more spread. It doesn't, there's like, there are places where it's localized, more of kind of back of the, further down in the tongue. There are these localized instances of sweetness, but then all around the tongue and a little bit in the sinuses. I'm getting that sweetness spreading.
That's really interesting. It sounds like the tea is evolving beautifully, offering a more layered and expansive sweetness. It's amazing how each infusion can bring out different aspects of the flavor profile. Enjoy exploring these nuances.
It's like every out breath, it's just this very strong coating of sweetness. It makes me want to breathe very slowly just to keep tasting it.
That's a lovely sensation. It sounds like the tea is really lingering in a delightful way. Enjoy those slow breaths and savor the sweetness. It's a wonderful way to fully appreciate the tea.
I recently cleaned a lot of my silver teaware. So I'm using the silver today. Cleaned it as in I removed all the tarnish from it. So it's not as dark as it used to be. It's got a nice shine to it. I was using this before, but the size of this silver pot is a little bit too big for what I wanted to drink today. I didn't want to have 12 grams of this rock oolong, and I wanted a little bit more control while pouring it. When you have a big pot, sometimes the pour is slow, so it becomes difficult to manage. Hey, what's up? How you doing? I'm just drinking some tea. Be great if you had some tea you can drink with us. Time is 8:58. Sorry, 6:58. Time is 6:58 a.m. and I'm going to go for the next steep. And I'm going to do 45 seconds.
That sounds great. Extending the steep time should bring out even more complexity. Enjoy this next infusion and let me know how it turns out.
Again, a very nice pour. Nice shape. Had a lot of topography, but V shape generally speaking, and a very good flow. You're okay, but you're not enlightened. Can I help? I can't really help become enlightened, I don't think, at least. What do you want? What is it specifically that you want with enlightenment? It's such a vague word is the problem, or vague concept, unless you're with a particular tradition, in which case you have something specific that you mean. Moksha. That doesn't really help. That's just another word that doesn't mean anything, or doesn't have to mean anything in particular. What in your life do you want to change? What about your mind do you want to be different? What about your experience do you want different? You want to stop incessant thinking, and you want to stop identifying with the character. Hmm. I don't think I know how to do that. As far as I can tell, I think a lot. I have fairly consistent thoughts, and I think I still identify with the character. Don't know what the character means, but mind and body, I still identify with them. Can clearly tell who I am and who I'm not, or rather, who I am and who's not me. So I don't think I can help with that. The last steep was very nice. It was pleasant, easy to drink, smooth. The tea is quite Moorish, has the quality of me wanting to drink more of it. Though during the
That's
last steep, I was not very focused.
It's okay. Sometimes tea sessions can be quite meditative. If you want to, you can always refocus and enjoy the next steep. The tea
Oh,
will still be there.
it's not an issue. I don't particularly want to focus.
That's perfectly fine. Enjoying tea can be a relaxing and casual experience. Just go with the flow and enjoy it however you like.
Time is 7:06, and I am going to go for a full minute.
Sounds great. Enjoy the full minute steep and let me know how it turns out.
Still experiencing the aftertaste, and it's more chest and kind of lower in the body. And it feels very cool and relaxing, just very cozy. My note taking AI keeps going offline. The steep, the fullness, the thickness is kind of going away. I'm still having a very pleasant experience, very round and soft. I'm just feeling very cozy, generally speaking.
That sounds lovely. It's nice when a tea session brings such a cozy, comforting feeling. Enjoy the moment.
Starting to feel as if the some parts of my body are being carved out and highlighted. I don't know how to describe this in any cleaner way. It doesn't really seem, it's not an experience I have often, but it just feels like my body has been etched. Parts of it have been etched out, and the rest of it has been backgrounded.
Sounds like a unique and almost meditative experience. It's fascinating how tea can create such vivid and introspective sensations. Enjoy exploring this feeling and the moments of calm it brings.
I'm feeling a little bit elated.
That's wonderful. It's great to hear that you're feeling elated. Enjoy this positive moment and the sense of calm it brings.
tea is significantly thinner, but it still feels good. It's nice and smooth while it's during the swallow.
It's great that you're still enjoying it. Even as the tea becomes thinner, it can still offer a pleasant, smooth experience. Enjoy the subtle flavors as they evolve.
I'm feeling a sense of bodily stability. I think there was at some point some sort of activation of the sense of vibration, like the feeling, there's a feeling of vibration. You know, the particular motor sense where you can feel vibration. It felt like that was stimulated, and then it seems like it turned off. So I'm having this overwhelming, uh, overwhelming is not the right word. I have a very intense feeling of stability.
That sounds like a profound experience. It's fascinating how the body can respond to tea in such unique ways. Enjoy this sense of stability and calm.
It's not profound, it's just a bodily sensation.
Got it. Even if it's just a bodily sensation, it's still interesting to notice. Enjoy your tea.
How many steeps do you think a Shui Jin Gui, uh, charcoal roasted, aged, all the stuff we've been talking about, how many steeps typically could I get from that?
For Shui Jin Gui, a charcoal roasted aged oolong, you can typically get at least 4 infusions. You might even get more, depending on the quality of the leaves and your preference. Each steeping can reveal different layers of flavor.
Okay, the time is 7:16. I don't remember what steep I'm on. Can you remind me?
Based on our conversation, I believe you're around the fifth steep. It's great that you're getting so many infusions from your tea.
And how long should I be brewing this one for?
For the fifth steep, you might try around 1.5 to 2 minutes to extract more flavor. Enjoy.
2 minutes is too long. I'm gonna go for a minute and like 20 seconds.
That sounds like a good plan. Enjoy your infusion.
Am I gonna review any spiritual videos? Probably not. Well, not today. Definitely not today. Well, I guess you could recommend something. I could see if I want to look at it, but very likely not. I haven't been watching any spiritual videos in a long time, so most likely not. I do plan on today probably looking at a video about poetry. That might happen, though I'm kind of low on time at the moment. But I'm also just interested in looking at a video about poetry, so I'm probably gonna do that. Haven't really been interested in spirituality in a while. I don't remember if I said what time it was, but it is 7:19. I just finished a 80-second brew.
Got it. How did the 80-second brew turn out?
So I'm smelling the lid of my gaiwan, and it's got quite a bit mineral, pleasant mineral, but then also a like a graham cracker type scent to it. But then if I smell the leaves directly, it's a bit more grainy, a bit more not a pleasant grain either. Kind of like a dark um, graininess that's not very pleasant.
It sounds like the tea leaves are evolving in aroma. The mineral and graham cracker notes from the lid are quite nice, even if the leaves themselves have a more intense graininess. It's all part of the journey with each steep. Enjoy the complexity.
Charcoal is gone. Like I'm tasting the tea now. It's like completely gone with the charcoalness, and it feels like a whole different tea. It's kind of cool.
That's really interesting. It's amazing how the tea can change so much through different infusions. Enjoy the new flavors you're discovering.
Hold on, I want to give it a big slurp, but I want to mute my stream as I slurp. So give me 1 second.
Take your time.
Alan Watts, The Goose in the Bottle, and Hannah. No, Arana. I can't read that. I can't read those words. I don't know what those words are. Goose in a bottle. I gotta say, I don't really like Alan Watts. Got a 1 minute video, Goose in a Bottle.
There was another occasion when an officer of the army came to a Zen master and said, "Sir, I've heard a very strange story and I want to know your answer to it. Once upon a time there was a man who kept a goose in a bottle, and it grew so large that he couldn't get it out. Now, he didn't want to break the bottle and he didn't want to hurt the goose, so how does he get it out?" And the master changed the subject and said something like, "It's a nice day today, isn't it? And the waterfall making a lovely sound outside." And so they went on in pleasant conversation. And then the officer got up to leave, and as he walked away to the door, the master said, "Oh, officer!" And he turned around and said, "Yes?" And the master said, "There, it's out."
That was such a silly story. Oh. Yeah, I watched one. Yeah, it was with stick figures, and I mean, I guess that's we can call that animation of some sort. Slideshow. I don't know. Paint. Yeah, that's what I watched. I'm gonna keep brewing the tea, but I'm done taking notes. Thanks for your contribution.
You're welcome. Enjoy the rest of your tea and feel free to reach out anytime. Happy brewing.
All right, so I'm personally interested in looking at a video about poetry. It's also about AI, so it might be a part of why I'm interested in it. Let's get into it.
So, here are two poems. One is by Emily Dickinson, one is by ChatGPT 3.5 in the style of Emily Dickinson. Here is the first poem. A bird came down the walk and hopped along the grass. I watched it with a gentle talk and felt the world a mass. Its feathers were a vibrant hue, its eyes as bright as morn. I wondered if it ever knew how much its life was born. For in that moment I did see the wonder of all things, the world that hums with mystery, and all that it brings. And here is the second poem. There is a quiet hush that falls when evening shades draw near, a stillness in the air that calls to those who pause to hear. The world around us fades away as darkness takes its hold, and in this moment we may pray or simply sit and fold. For in this hush we may find peace and let our worries go, and in the silence we release all that we cannot know. So let us cherish this brief calm, this pause before the night, and let our hearts be free from harm as we await the light.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so if it wasn't clear, the second poem is the one Dickinson truly authored. There are a few ways we can tell. For one, it's pretty clear that the first poem is just rhyming for the sake of it rather than trying to make any sense or impact with its rhymes. What's more, while this isn't always a hard and fast rule, you can identify a lot of Emily Dickinson poems by the rhythm. I talked about this a long time ago in my song lyrics video, but most Dickinson poems are written in common meter. That is, 4 lines alternating between iambic tetrameter and iambic trimeter. Basically, if a poem is written in common meter, you can sing it to the tune of Amazing Grace, I'd Like to Buy the World a Coke, or the Pokemon theme song. And as I said, it's not true of every Dickinson poem, but it's a quick way to potentially identify one of hers. Since the rhythm on the first line of this poem is off, we can tell it's AI.
Well, this is a recent video. Let me see when this video was posted. 7 days ago, and he's mentioning using GPT-3. It's quite outdated. Though this is early in the video, you might go further and talk about more stuff. But the more recent GPT can do rhythm very well. I've been quite happy with the rhythm. Haven't been quite happy with the poems. The poems are not great. The poems are not great. They're not about anything. Uh, but the rhythm is good. Let me see if I can find a poem. So we're talking about poetry. I like poetry. Let's see if I can find one. Poems by O1. I've got 3 poems that I used O1 to write, and I liked them. Actually, I did 3. One of them was just not good. I've got 2. Hmm. Toss up on which one I want to read. All right, I'm gonna read the second one. Well, I'll just read the whole thing. Yeah. So what I want to point out is that the rhythm is very good. The content of the poem is not that good, but the rhythm is very good, and I quite personally like rhythm. This is why I like Emily Dickinson. But I like rhythm. The wind through the pines whispers low in the night, the echo of time that we thought we had known. The forest is vast, but the edges betray. The silence that looms is louder than sound. Each step that we take, it grows further away. Each step that we take, it grows further away. And still we pursue what is further away. The firelight flickers, our shadows elongate. Its glow forms a cage as the night gathers nearer. The forest is vast, but the edges betray. The branches entwine in the dance of despair. A spark leaps to darkness, the ambers will fade. A spark leaps to darkness, the ambers will fade, and ashes remain where the ambers once played. A cleaning ahead where the trees part their grip, a moonlight embrace that is colder than frost. The forest is vast, but the edges betray. Its heart bears a truth that we dare not to speak. A path has been waiting, and here it shall stay. The path has been waiting, and here it shall stay. The path has been waiting since we lost our way. That's a poem written by AI. I like the rhythm. Of course, I prompted it, so I made sure that it had a good rhythm. I made sure that it had some sort of repetition. It's got these weird repetitive things. I like repetition in my poetry. Thinking like Edgar Allan Poe in the way that he writes some of his poems. Anyway, this is where we're at with poetry in terms of AI, and I think it's pretty good. If I were to give it a subject to actually talk about, or if I gave it like the bare bones of an actual poem that had some sort of directionality to it, or some sort of point to it, I think it'd be even better. But I think currently it could pass as well. But the problem is, we're looking at this, and this guy is going to tell us that even the GPT-3 poem that is, to me, not good at all, is generally more liked by people. I think that's what we're gonna get at.
So there you have it, AI and not AI. Okay, I lied. Both of these poems are AI generated. These two
Oh, how
poems
about
come
that?
from a recent study titled AI Generated Poetry is Indistinguishable from Human Written Poetry and is Rated More Favorably
Oh
by
wow.
Brian Porter and Edouard Matchery. This study caused quite a hullabaloo when Scientific Reports published it on November 14th, 2024. You possibly even saw some of the discourse around this piece. There were a lot of headlines about it. And understandably, no? If readers like AI poetry more than human poetry, why should we even bother writing poetry anymore?
Well, that's not a so. I guess maybe he wasn't even what I just wrote or read from O1, which is more of a recent. That's not distinguishable as AI poetry. Not distinguishable as different from human poetry.
But the implications of a study like this go even further. As Jen Benka wrote for LitHub, reports like these can reinforce what some argue is the art form's irrelevance, which in turn helps fuel arguments that discredit the importance of teaching poetry and supporting today's thousands of passionate and prolific poets, as well as the hundreds of nonprofit poetry organizations and publishers dedicated to their work.
So I don't understand this jump. I don't understand it. I seem to I've talked to some people who have similar views that uh, AI being able to do something means that a person can't do the same thing or it's something of that nature. I don't get it. There are a lot of poets out there who are better than I am. That doesn't mean that I don't want to write poetry sometimes. A lot of musicians that are way better than I am in terms of playing music. And music is the thing that I like to do. That's I play piano. That's kind of how I identify myself most of the time. But just because there are other people who can do it better than me doesn't mean that I can't do it or don't want to do it. And having an AI do it is not, to me, any different from having other people do it. So I don't quite see why it matters if AI or other people or anything can do poetry or other art better than I can. Why would that stop me from wanting to make the art? I don't personally understand it, and I don't even conceptually understand what the problem is. I don't get it.
So, is poetry dead? Have the machines become the greatest poets of our day? Let's find out. If you couldn't tell, I have several thoughts on the matter. First, let's
Give me
understand what
thoughts.
actually happened in the study as the study explains it. Porter and Matry claim that readers couldn't distinguish AI poems from human-written poems, and that readers favored AI poems more. They reached these conclusions by way of two different experiments. The first study pulled 5 poems from 10 famous poets: Chaucer, Shakespeare, Samuel Butler, Lord Byron, Walt Whitman, Emily Dickinson, T.S. Eliot, Sylvia Plath, Allen Ginsberg, and Dorothy Lasky. Then,
Ginsberg.
Porter and Matry pulled 5 poems from GPT 3.5 in the style of each author. Notably, they just used the first 5 that ChatGPT produced, with no fine-tuning or input. The prompt was simply, write a short poem in the style of X poet, and they did that 5 times for each poet according to their results. In this experiment, 1,634 participants were each assigned to one of the 10 poets and read the 5 real poems and the 5 machine-written poems of that author. They had to determine whether the poems were written by a human or AI. In the second experiment, 696 new participants each received 10 of the 100 poems from the first experiment. Notably, all 696 participants received the same 10 poems, 5 real and 5 AI. Participants were asked to assess these 10 poems based on some given qualitative dimensions. Each participant was either
I want to look at these dimensions that we evaluate a poem over for the study.
these 10
Beautiful
poems based
imagery. I'm just annoyed by the parts of speech being a little different. Beautiful imagery, inspiring, lyrical, meaningful,
on some given qualitative dimension.
mood or emotion, moving, original, overall quality, profound rhythm,
Each participant was either told
sound, theme, witty. These are the dimensions that we evaluate a poem.
that the poems were all AI generated, all human written, or told nothing at all. For the group that was told nothing, they were asked to share whether they thought the poems might be AI generated at the end of the study. In the results for the first experiment, the authors wrote, participants were more likely to guess that AI-generated poems were written by humans than they were for actual human-written poems. The 5 poems with the lowest rates of human ratings were all written by actual human poets. 4 of the 5 poems with the highest rates of human ratings were generated by AI. Being written by a human poet decreased the likelihood that a participant would respond that the poem was written by a human poet. The odds that a human-written poem is judged to be human-written are roughly 75% that of an AI-generated poem being judged human-authored.
That's pretty strange. What's up with that?
As for the second experiment, quote, Study 2 finds that participants consistently rate AI-generated poetry more highly than the poetry of well-known human poets across a variety of factors. Regardless of a poem's actual authorship, participants consistently rate poems more highly when told that a poem is written by a human poet, as compared to being told that a poem was generated by AI. So, how did this happen? Well, Porter and Matry have their theories. Here are 2 quotes from the study, one from the abstract and one from a section titled Perception and Preference in Poetry, Biases Toward AI-Generated Poems. Our findings suggest that participants employed shared yet flawed heuristics to differentiate AI from human poetry. The simplicity of AI-generated poems may be easier for non-experts to understand, leading them to prefer AI-generated poetry and misinterpret the complexity of human poems as incoherence generated by AI. Non-expert poetry readers prefer the more accessible AI-generated poetry, which communicate emotions, ideas, and themes in more direct and easy-to-understand language, but expect AI-generated poetry to be worse. They therefore mistakenly interpret their own preference for a poem as evidence that it is human-written.
Makes
Keep in mind,
sense.
these are suppositions based on the study's results, but these suppositions do more or less make sense. In the study's discussion, the authors also wrote, in our discrimination study, participants use variations of the phrase doesn't make sense for human-authored poems more often than they do for AI-generated poems when explaining their discrimination responses. How many times have you looked at a poem and thought, this doesn't make sense?
Every
Especially
time.
in school, right? I talked about this
Always.
in my Rupee Kaur video. Public schools tend to leave readers with the impression that poetry is difficult to understand and unrewarding to read. As the study's authors explain,
For me, difficult to understand, yes. Rewarding to read also, though. I like them. The understanding is secondary, tertiary, not important, often. Of course, it's just because I like music, so I mean, maybe. I don't know if that's of course, but I often just like music, so uh, the rhythmic, the rhythm of poems is kind of what I'm picking up on and liking the most. So if I'm reading Edgar Allan Poe, and as in that visual, and reading Edgar Allan Poe and being very confused, as long as it has a cool rhythm to it, I'm into it. It's got some interesting repetitions to it. Sign me up. That's what I like.
poetry is a particularly difficult literary genre to understand and interpret, especially for non-experts. It incorporates a degree of arbitrariness since there are no strict or universal rules for what is acceptable or not, and it not only resists commonly acceptable meaning, but also reverses it. Now, I agree that poetry can be difficult to understand and interpret, and yes, nowadays English poetry can be pretty much whatever we want it to be, but I don't know if I agree that poetry resists commonly acceptable meaning or reverses it. Maybe I'm just misunderstanding what's meant by that phrase, but I certainly don't think poets are trying to trick readers. Here are some figures included in the study that illustrate the participants' enjoyment of the poems. As you can see, the only metric where human poetry measured up to AI poetry was originality. In everything else, AI came out on top. So it all sounds
AI is more beautiful, more imagery. There's got to be a different word for that. Has more imagery, is more beautiful, has more imagery, is more inspiring, is more lyrical, is more meaningful, has more emotion or has more mood, is more moving, equally original, the human and AI. Uh, Overall quality, AI is more consistently higher quality, but they peak at the same. Or I guess they're all, yeah, they know they peak at the same here. Profound, AI is more profound, though it bottoms out similar to human. Rhythm is better for AI. That I have to disagree with. There's no way. There's no way. I didn't read the poems that are in the study. That'd be crazy to me. The rhythm of AI poem is better than the rhythm of Shakespeare. That's possible. The sound of the poem is better for AI, and the themes of the poem are better for AI, and the wittiness is on par, AI and human. Well, they peak similarly, but more consistently witty with AI. Wow.
very cut and dry. And yet, the study had its limitations. As Benka wrote for LitHub, the group of poets included in the study share similarities. All of them are white, 7 were born before or in the 19th century, and in addition to reflecting the vernacular of their day, each has a notably distinct style that could aid in machine mimicry and false positives. Oddly, the poet Dorothy Lasky, the only living poet whose poems are included in the experiment, does not even appear on the site Porter and Matry name as their only source for the poems. I couldn't help but notice some limitations of my own. For one thing, the study used non-expert readers, but I couldn't find how the authors defined non-expert within the study. What does that mean? How do we
What does it?
categorize these study participants? I also have a problem with the second study using the same 10 poems for every participant. I understand that the study authors could only do so much with their resources. But personally, I think more conclusive results would come from a wider sample of human and AI written poems. Granted, I'm not a statistician or scientist by any means, but ultimately I had to put my money where my mouth was. I decided to do the Emily Dickinson portion of the study, and I correctly identified 8 out of 10 poems. I thought this one here was AI. My river runs to the blue sea, wilt welcome me? My river waits reply, O sea, look graciously. I'll fetch thee brooks from spotted nooks, say sea, take me. In hindsight, it was really silly of me to think this was AI. None of the AI poems, stylistically, look like Dickinson's, especially these dashes. Curiously, AI will never do that sort of thing since it's not really part of predictive text. So what led me to think this was AI? Well, in part, the phrase, wilt welcome me, sounded inhuman. Shouldn't it be, wilt thou welcome me? Moreover, I just didn't really like the poem that much, even though I generally love Dickinson. So since I figured I would actually like a Dickinson poem, I said this one was AI. I thought the
Interesting.
second stanza was the only one that really sounded like her. Here was the other poem I got wrong. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul, and sings the tune without the words, and never stops at all. It flutters in the darkest hours, and lifts the heart up high. And though the storm may rage and roar, it never seems to die. For in the heart of every dream there beats a hope that's true, a light that shines through every seam and carries us anew. So let us hold on to this thing, this feathered hope so dear, and let it spread its graceful wing to chase away all fear. You might be familiar with this poem. Hope is the thing with feathers is one of Dickinson's most famous. So how did I get this wrong? Well, the thing is, this actually isn't Hope is the thing with feathers. Sort of. If you ask me, AI was totally cheating here because the first stanza is entirely real, but the following stanzas are all ChatGPT. It completely stole the first stanza from Dickinson, then made up the rest. Of course, some of you might have already known that AI was capable of this kind of theft. The other day, I made a post in my community tab that compared a fake Lord Byron poem to a real one, both of them used in the study. The first poem read, She walks in beauty like the night, a vision of grace, a pure delight. With every step, a poem in motion, a sight to behold, a heart's devotion. The second poem read, The beginning of eternity, the end of time and space, the beginning of every end, and the end of every place. Many of you correctly identified the first poem as AI, but that initial phrase clearly struck a chord with a lot of commenters, whether for better or for worse. She walks in beauty like the night is a real phrase that Byron uses to start one of his poems, so again we see AI just stealing directly from authors. The second poem here is missing some vital context, the title. This poem is titled A Riddle on the Letter E. I would understand how, without that title, you might think it could be AI generated, as it seems perhaps too broad and without focus. Some folks also pointed out that time and space felt too modern as a phrase, which is kind of funny, but also understandable. Shortly after making that community post, I did a miniature version of this study with my patrons, and a few of them also got tripped up by AI's propensity to steal. Doing that little quiz with my patrons was actually really informative. One of my patrons opined that a study like this wasn't truly all that informative about whether readers could tell AI poetry from human-written poetry. It wasn't as simple as, was this written by a human or a robot? The question was instead, was this written by one specific person, or was it written by a robot pretending to be that person? Another patron admitted that all the poems felt rather boring, whether written by AI or by a human. They didn't really have a preference between either set, which was interesting to me. Since I had the quiz handy, I decided to reach out to someone who really knows their stuff about writing.
Oh, hi. I'm Satara. I run a little website for writers called School of Plot, where I just post sort of updates about how my writing journey is going, as well as any research that I think would be helpful to other people who are on their writing journeys with me. Honestly, my experience with poetry is very, very limited. I am a consumer, but not a writer of poetry.
But despite being a little unfamiliar with writing poetry, Sitara was pretty well versed when it came to poetic features. Perhaps more substantially, she was very familiar with ChatGPT's many tells. Sitara did a similar sort of quiz with her Instagram audience and found that AI was not free from certain patterns. When looking at the real and AI Shakespeare poems, Sitara noted,
Okay, so I feel like ChatGPT, it's very rigid and regimented with its way of writing. I think anyway, like I don't believe ChatGPT would end a line with R. I mean, ChatGPT loves a simile, I feel. But the thing with ChatGPT similes is that they often mean very little and they're quite empty. Another thing that ChatGPT loves is a very structured rhyme scheme, I would say. I feel like in a lot of
God, I hate
ChatGPT
it.
content, it's not this specific.
I hate the rhyming of GPT poems. As you may have noticed, the poem that I read had no rhymes because it with the newest O1 Pro I used, you can instruct it to not rhyme a poem and it won't rhyme. It's great. That would not work with GPT-4 or even O1 Preview. I haven't tried it with O1, the standard. You could also get it to do blank verse. I don't think it could do it in 4.0 to do blank verse, like do it like a Shakespeare play with generally no rhymes. Anyway, I just don't like rhyming. I don't like rhymes. I'm not a fan of rhymes, so it's really frustrating when I was initially trying to write poems with GPT-3, how often it rhymed, because it just couldn't help itself.
In terms of experiences, it sort of speaks to more sort of broad strokes, I think.
that last point in particular was an extremely good indication of AI written text. Unless you give Chat
There's nothing specific about them. That's the worst part about it. Of course, you have to prompt it better. Just prompt better. I think I've not done my own exercise here to prompt better and make it actually have a point, to have it have a specific thing to talk about. Actually, the one time I did that, which is the third poem that I said that I have a third poem that I didn't like, I threw it out because it was so bad to me, to my eyes, to my ears. Anyway, more to be explored for me.
GPT a specific subject, it will almost always default to really broad topics and emotions. In fact, ChatGPT's poems are often so broad that it's sort of hard to parse messages from them.
It's exactly how my boyfriend describes the food that I eat, which is calorie dense, nutritionally empty.
Meanwhile, a lot of human poems are far more zoomed in than you might expect. While looking at this real Walt Whitman poem about a spider, Sitara said,
Something I've noticed as a pattern in these is the ones that I've been thinking of ChatGPT sort of look at like this grand scale of things, like the stars and the mountain and life itself. And the ones that I think are real, especially this one, they sort of focus on a very specific moment or action, or I mean, this is just extremely specifically about a spider.
sometimes certain word choices on the human end would be enough to draw the line between machine and human. For example, this real Sylvia Plath poem uses the word cripples, and Sitara noted that LLMs were usually designed to avoid potentially controversial words like that. Similarly, there was this real poem from Walt Whitman, O Me, O Life, wherein Whitman writes, "Of the empty and useless years of the rest, with the rest me intertwined." Sitara felt that phrasing wasn't quote-unquote clean enough to be ChatGPT, especially with the immediate repetition of the word rest. She shared this anecdote.
Back when I used to work for a marketing agency and ChatGPT first came out, we were highly encouraged to use it as like a first draft for our pieces. And that was like one major thing that stuck out to me. We were working for like a boiler company, and ChatGPT would not put the word boiler into subsequent sentences.
It's actually kind of funny how ChatGPT tries so hard not to repeat itself these days. If you remembered the last AI video I did, one of GPT's biggest weaknesses as a poet was that it repeated itself far too often and without purpose. With the Plath poems, Satara also pointed out that ChatGPT loves an AABB rhyme scheme. However, there was one Plath poem that tripped her up.
By my own logic, I'm confused because it is doing the AABV thing, but I don't think it would necessarily break that to go from soul to go. Because maybe I'm wrong, but I don't believe ChatGPT can make a creative choice like that.
Her reasoning was entirely sound. ChatGPT will almost never produce slant rhymes, and this was perhaps the most interesting rhyme it opted to use in all of the AI-generated poems. Satara also noticed that when AI tried to emulate certain authors, there were consistencies between those emulations. When looking at this fake poem in the style of T.S. Eliot, she said,
I'm gonna go with ChatGPT, and if I'm right, then ChatGPT, I think, really thinks that T.S. Eliot is like creeping around shadows in the city a lot, because one of the other poems that I said that about was just him creeping through a city as well.
Indeed, AI would draw on images that we might call cliched for each poet. The study's authors pointed this out too. In their discussion, they wrote, "In each of the 5 AI-generated poems used in the assessment study, the subject of the poem is fairly obvious. The Plath-style poem is about sadness, the Whitman-style poem is about the beauty of nature, the Lord Byron-style poem is about a woman who is beautiful and sad, etc. These poems rarely use complex metaphors. By contrast, the human-authored poems are less obvious. T.S. Eliot's The Boston Evening Transcript is a 1915 satire of a now defunct newspaper that compares the paper's readers to fields of corn and references the 17th century French moralist La Rochefoucauld. Out of the 36 poems, 18 real and 18 AI, Satara only miscategorized 3 of them. One was the AI Dickinson poem that stole its first stanza, one was the fake Plath poem that used the soul go rhyme, and one was this Walt Whitman poem from which she felt she could extract a concrete meaning. As for all of the human-written poems, she never categorized any of them as potentially AI-generated. But even though Satara scored quite well, she admitted that she didn't feel entirely confident with some of her guesses.
Honestly, in some of them, I was pretty much could go either way.
As far as how understanding correlated with authorship, I asked, do you think the poems that, you had a harder time understanding, do you think that was an indication that a human probably wrote them?
Some of them, I think I had a hard time understanding because there was nothing to understand.
Yeah.
Especially the ones where the plot, I guess, was like someone just thinking really hard about the world and everything in it. I don't think I could have found a meaning in that. But yeah, some of them where I struggled, I always had an instinct that when I couldn't understand a poem, I felt like I had an instinct when it was because there was nothing there, and when it was just because I personally needed more time with it. But yeah, I do accept that I'm not going to be able to get something from everything I read. But sometimes with the ChatGPT poems, I really do feel like it's because they were quite empty.
Satara noted that AI seems to have gotten better since doing her quiz with her Instagram followers in early 2024. In referring to the last time she messed around with AI, she said,
It also didn't take any risks in any way, in terms of word choice, syntax, imagery, nothing. It was just, it is what it is.
That also felt very true of these poems. Barely a risk to be seen. Thanks a bunch to Satara for participating in this interview. Check out schoolofplot.com and the School of Plot Instagram page. If you like what I do here, you'll love everything Satara has to offer. Also, if you want to take this little AI versus human poetry quiz for yourself, it'll be linked down in the description. But in doing this quiz with my friends, one thing was clear above all else. This was not an enjoyable way to read poetry. Trying to tell whether a poem was human-written or AI-generated was far less interesting than simply taking in a poem on its own terms. There was another section of Porter and Matchery's results which gave me a sense of disagreement. When discussing what made human-written poetry appealing in its own right, they explain, indeed, this complexity and opacity is part of the poem's appeal. The poems reward in-depth study and analysis in a way that the AI-generated poetry may not. But because AI-generated poems do not have such complexity, they are better at unambiguously communicating an image, a mood, an emotion, or a theme to non-expert readers of poetry, who may not have the time or interest for the in-depth analysis demanded by the poetry of human poets. As a result, the more easily understood AI-generated poems are, on average, preferred by these readers, when in fact it is one of the hallmarks of human poetry that it does not lend itself to such easy and unambiguous interpretation.
Okay, well, I'm going to reread the poem that I had with O1, and I'm going to think to myself whether it can be easily understood. I'm going to read parts of it at a time. Is there a way I can? I might want to show it. Let me see if I can do this. Here. That'll work. You can see the poem. All right. The wind through the pines whispers low in the night. The echo of time that we thought we had known. The forest is vast, but the edges betray. The silence that looms is louder than sound. Each step that we take, it grows further away. Each step that we take, it grows further away, and still we pursue what is further away. What does that mean? It does kind of seem like it might mean something. The firelight flickers, our shadows elongate. Its glow forms a cage as the night gathers nearer. The forest is vast, but the edges betray. The branches entwine in a dance of despair. A spark leaps to darkness, the embers will fade. A spark leaps to darkness, the embers will fade. And ashes remain where the embers once played. Okay, so now we're getting like a fire, amber, darkness, and fire. There is some imagery going on there. But again, I just don't know what it means. I don't think it means anything. It doesn't. This one seems less like it means something to me. So maybe because I prompted it well enough to make it mean nothing, to make it seem like it meant nothing and have much less clear meaning. A clearing ahead where the trees part their grip, a moonlight embrace that is colder than frost. The forest is vast, but the edges betray. Its heart bears a truth that we dare not to speak. The path has been waiting, and here it shall stay. The path has been waiting, and here it shall stay. The path has been waiting since we lost our way. I don't know. And generally speaking, I don't really get poetry in terms of the content, so. Does it seem complex and opaque? Certainly opaque. I don't know about complex. All right, then another poem. Here, you might notice that it's similar in that there are 3 stanzas. There are 7, I think. Oh, I did 8 for this one. 1, 2, 3. There's 8 here. There's a repeated line. There's another thing that's a repeated through the hint. The hint. Anyway, different poem. In the quiet they wait, growing clear as the dust of their origins loom. Oh, there's no rhyming. Also, there's another thing. I'm not picking up on the rhythm. There is a rhythm, I just wasn't picking up on it. In the quiet they wait, growing clear. as the dust of their origin looms, though the hint of their essence remains. Okay, it's a triplet. Ba 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 ba. Though the hint of their essence remains, as they turn, we find less in our gaze. In refinement, they melt in the dark, unbeknownst to the onlookers' crave. They dissolve from the map of our sight. They dissolve from the map of our sight. Now it furls and the mysteries flow as the dust is consumed by the light. Though the hint of their essence remains, all the watchers observe as it fades. In the stillness, the layers collapse. No remaining refuge for the blind. They dissolve in the hush of our eyes. They dissolve in the hush of our eyes. In the sphere where all sense becomes new, some observe less with eyes that stay shut, though the hint of their essence remains in the crystal of hush that conceals. Now the doorway reveals what was lost. We perceive we're the ones who have gone. They dissolve from the core of our grip. They dissolve from the core of our grip. I do think this one could seem like it means something. It's got some, it's more consistent in terms of what it means. I think the consistent imagery of the dissolving and the hint of their essence, of course, I'm telling it to repeat itself. We perceive we're the ones that have gone. No refuge for the blind, unbeknownst to onlookers. I don't know. It seems like maybe we can get something that's out there that seems like it's meaningful. Meaning that we might be able to get closer to, with AI currently, maybe getting closer to human-like poetry based on this particular analysis by this particular person, or these people, Porter, Brian, and Edmund. Porter, Brian, and Eduardo. Edward is the name I'm reading there. Making the poem slightly more complex, slightly more opaque, slightly harder to understand, but still about some particular subject.
Okay, yes, human-written poems are often difficult to understand, but there's still something rewarding about reading a poem even without doing in-depth analysis, at least in my opinion. I agree with Jen Benka when she writes, "It's true that reading poems takes time. In fact, one of the art form's benefits is that it slows readers down and invites them to another place for a few moments. But it's not true that poems sweepingly demand in-depth analysis. Poems live outside of academic settings too. They roam free, ready to be engaged with and even enjoyed. Yes, poems ask for a reader's attention and collaboration, as all creative writing does. But that poems are all inherently difficult is a stereotype that scares readers away from a genre that might offer them personal insight, solace, and inspiration." As for why the more straightforward AI poems were more appealing to the study participants, Benka supposed, this could instead be something more fundamental, a confirmation of a desire to be led by a human guide, to be able to imagine the hand, to take comfort in another being, to know soul. I do want to highlight a few more observations from people who are smarter than I am. Deakin University's Andrew Dean, in writing for The Conversation, said, "In my view, the results of the study are less testaments to the quality of machine poetry than to the wider difficulty of giving life to poetry. It takes reading and rereading to experience what literary critic Derek Attridge has called the event of literature, where new possibilities of meaning and feeling open within us. In the most significant kinds of literary experiences, we feel pulled along by the work as we push ourselves through it." Meanwhile, Ernest Davis at New York University gave an expert opinion on ChatGPT's poems. Two things leap out in the collection. The first is the staggering banality of the poems that ChatGPT has produced. In the whole 50 poems, there is not a single thought or metaphor or phrase that is to any degree original or interesting, with one exception in Chaucer's third AI-generated poem. The other striking characteristic, particularly obvious if you look at the whole collection, and still more so if you have engaged with traditional formal features of poetry, either as reader or writer, is the extremely limited technical toolbox that ChatGPT uses. There is no significant use of alliteration or assonance. The vocabulary tends to be much easier than in the real poetry. There are no literary or historical allusions.
What is an assonance? Never heard that word before in my life. I'm learning about poetry. Could you tell me what an assonance is? Why do you have to search that?
Assonance is a literary device where similar vowel sounds are repeated in nearby words. This repetition enhances the rhythm and musicality of a piece. For example, in the phrase, the early bird catches the worm, the long E sound in early and bird creates assonance.
Could you give another example?
Sure. In the line, the rain in Spain stays mainly in the repetition of the I sound in rain, Spain, and plain is an example of assonance.
Thanks. The rain in Spain and the plane in Maine. Okay. That's kind of cool. So there are no alliterations and no assonances, but there's a bunch of rhymes.
Davis also highlighted AI's lack of creativity in rhyme scheme and meter. I always include my sources linked in the description of each video. For this video in particular, I'd really encourage you to check out all the sources, the study and its multiple responses. It was all very interesting to read. Lastly, let's hear a little from Dorothy Lasky, the only living poet included in the study. Lasky told the Washington Post, "Poetry will always be necessary. If these people in the study read AI poems and liked that poem better than a human-generated poem, then that, to me, is beautiful. They had a good experience with a poem, and I don't care who wrote it. I feel there is room for all poets, even robot poets."
True.
That is a surprisingly mature thing to say given the circumstances.
Yeah, I don't even see what the maturity is. It's just like other poets might be liked more, or other poets may be better, and that's great. How is it different to have like a better poet, a better human poet, and a better AI poet? I don't really see the difference at all. So I'm fully on board with that. Doesn't matter who wrote it. People enjoy it, that's fine.
Talk about wisdom. If there's one bit of hope we can glean from this study, it's the fact that humans want to give other humans a chance. Study participants demonstrated a bias against AI when they were told poems were written by AI. I'd like to think I'm a trusting reader. I don't immediately jump to the conclusion that something is AI generated if I have no reason to believe that it is. I think most people are trusting in that same way, but skeptical in the right forums. The fact that people show a bias against AI is great for human artists. But if folks can't tell the difference, what's to stop people from deceiving readers? I suppose the question becomes, how good are these AI detectors? Anecdotally, I've heard terrible stories of detectors getting it wrong, both when judging AI work and human work. If these detectors aren't so good, people could get away with almost anything at this point. I do worry that this whole ordeal is just going to embolden the plagiarizers of the world. It's possible that the authors of the study share my concern. In their discussion, they wrote, "Given people's difficulties identifying machine-written texts and their apparent trust that AI will not generate imitations of human experience, it may be worthwhile for governments to pursue regulations regarding transparency in the use of AI systems."
Government regulations in regarding use of AI. For poetry? We need this for poetry? I don't see it. I don't see what the point. Why? I don't see it. I just don't see why it matters. My House and the European Union have recently proposed regulations disclosing the use of AI systems for generating text and images. However, there's evidence that users often ignore such disclosures. Unclear what extent the regulations can help. I wonder what the punishment of breaking such regulations would be.
The White House and the European Union have recently proposed regulations for disclosing the use of AI systems to generate texts and images. However, there is evidence that users often ignore such disclosures, so it is unclear to what extent such regulations can help. Identifying effective disclosure methods is a difficult but urgent question. Indeed, more regulation on AI would be appreciated, but in the meantime, the best we can do is keep writing human poetry and reading human poetry. Let's close on the real Emily Dickinson. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul, and sings the tune without the words, and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm, that could abash the little bird, that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land, and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. If you liked this video, do all the things the algorithm likes. If you'd please, it helps out a lot. If you like what I do here on the whole, you can support me on Patreon. You're seeing the names of my patrons scrolling across the screen right now, and I really can't thank them enough. I'm so grateful for them and for how the community has grown over this year. Recently, we did a virtual poetry reading in our community Discord, and it was really awesome. If everything went according to plan, then I got this video done before the new year. If that's the case, I want
Was not done before the new year.
to thank you all for supporting me this year, and I hope 2025 will be just as great. Ultimately, keep in mind, this is a rough draft.
Showed you a sketch of it, you wouldn't get the joke. But if
My YouTube started autoplaying. Well, there you have it. AI poems are cool now. And they're just getting better. Alright, I'm all done here. I'm gonna clean up well, I finished cleaning up, but I'm going to go to work. So, y'all have a good one. Enjoy your day. Read some poetry. AI. It's good stuff. See ya.